It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Lehrling.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
But now she got me through like Undertale and a bunch of these other indie games, which I'm not sure if you played Undertale, but it'll make you cry. You really
played
should
Undertale. I'm pretty sure, 99% sure. And I remember thinking it was good. Didn't make me cry though.
Okay, well, I've got emotional by the end of it. And now I feel like if I got back into...
Oh, wait. Undertale, it's almost like comedically terrible. Not terrible, but
like the graphics are like very computer pixelated, like...
And the how characters are handled, they're very callously handled to where it's almost cruel sometimes.
A little bit. So basically, like the premise is like your character falls through a hole in the ground and enters like a realm of monsters. But the plot of the game is that you don't actually have to kill anything in the game in order to get through it.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And in fact, it's encouraged for you to just be completely pacifistic. There are like ways that you can beat every character without killing them. You'll get like a really sort of like deranged plot line if you end up killing any of the characters, especially if you kill all of them. But it's almost like almost like a Pokemon sort of like,
Yeah. I didn't finish it, but I did play it, and I remember there's I think it was when pretty early on in the game you like get attacked by Mr. and Mrs. Bones or something like that.
Yeah.
And then like I was like, okay, I'm fighting them back, and then like I killed one of them, and like the other is heartbroken and devastated because you just killed their partner.
Yeah. And like the first time I think I killed a frog the first time I played the game, and I was like, yeah, I got the frog. And then they were like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
You're a monster. And I was like, what's going on? This is the game. I'm supposed to play the game.
Yes.
And they're like, we hate you. And I was like, oh God. And I was like, Shalana, can we restart? And they're like, no, if you restart the save file, we'll know. And they'll get back to you. They'll come back after you.
Oh my gosh.
You have to like go into the programming of the game and completely like reset it. Because if you don't, it will still remember the fact that you killed a bunch of players in the previous playthrough.
That kind of sucks.
Yeah.
They all
be like,
remember.
Don't try to erase your mistakes. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
I didn't know.
It's a really good game. They also just dropped Deltarune, which is not a continuation, but in the same universe as Undertale. Very, very good.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Biographers. And maybe potential video game fans, if you want to go play Undertale, go do that as well. But I am Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hello.
We're about to get started onto our conclusion episode of our dear friend, Leonardo da Vinci. Before we get going into that, though, a couple quick announcements. We've been trying to be better about beginning of episode announcements rather than end of episode announcements, because I feel like if you end the episode and you're like, oh, I'm done, then you won't hear the things that we are trying to promote. So first and foremost, if anybody out there is enjoying the show, we would humbly ask for your support. That's just going to be at patreon.com/thebiographers. Right now, this is a totally self-funded endeavor, so any support you can give us to keep us going would be very much appreciated. So thank you in advance if you're able to do that. Number 2 is we are going to be launching a Kickstarter campaign very soon. I'm thinking right in the middle of August here, so just a couple weeks from now, if not even just like a week or some odd from now. That is going to be kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. That actually will have reward tiers, so that'll have things like hats and stickers and posters and signed posters, and there's even some potential talk, we haven't fully confirmed it yet, of maybe even Akiva doing some custom knife work for people if you're curious to
I'm already working on some of the designs right now. I think I want to go with something inspired by Leonardo da Vinci in a way.
Ooh, I like that. That would be pretty sweet. Now I want to know what it looks like. Just send me over the designs because now I'm curious. But that's really it. All that I wanted to call out really quickly before we get going. So without further ado, let us get into our conclusion of Leonardo da Vinci.
I will say, before we get into the script for the last episode of Leonardo da Vinci, we did want to make one, just something that we found kind of interesting. The first biography that Daniel ever did was on Mabel Dodge Lewin, and we noticed that she is, in one way or another, connected to almost every single person that we have talked about so far. If you haven't listened to the Mabel Dodge series, I highly recommend it. And,
yes. So what
yeah, go ahead.
Basically, what was the thing that I said to Akiva that had been floating in the back of my mind, but I just never had the moment to bring it up. So again, for anybody that is interested, go check out, it was the first series we did here on the Biographers. It was called Mabel Dodge Lujan, is this kind of patron of the arts who kind of formed this artist colony down in Taos, New Mexico, along with many, many, many other chapters of her life. One of which was she actually spent a good amount of time in Florence, Italy. And while she was in Florence, Italy, she befriended this man named Bindo Medici, who she called the last Medici. He wasn't the last Medici. He actually had, I think it was either a brother or a cousin that was also a Medici, but he was of the last of that direct family line. Mm-hmm. So she called him Bindo, and a little bit of a tragic story, a little bit of a spoiler. Bindo, very, very sadly, took his own life, and it was in many ways a direct result of some insensitive things that happened to him from Mabel Dodge. So again, this is not necessarily a promotion of Mabel doing that or anything, but it was because he was a gay man and because that was not accepted at all by the society at the time. And so there was just some callous treatment that happened, and it ultimately led to him taking his own life. But again, it was just one of these amazing things that it was going as far back to that and then going to Leonardo and saying, oh my gosh, Leonardo was inadvertently connected to Mabel Dodge Lujan.
Yeah, just some amazing rich lady in Taos somehow is just only a couple degrees away from Leonardo da Vinci's first patron, Lorenzo de Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent. I actually got into the sort of genealogy of the Medici family, and there is massive levels of dispute as to who is a true Medici, because there are so many sublines of Medici family. Obviously, they're a royal family, or not a royal family, but a very wealthy family, partially royal, I guess. So there was a lot of, marrying into other families, so last names would be taken. The official last Medici would be some lady in 1625, but there were already like 5 different sub-families of Medici, which Bindo was a part of.
Yep.
Still making him a direct descendant of Lorenzo the Magnificent.
Which is crazy.
Which is wild.
Yeah, and the fact that, to me, it's one of those amazing things that for anybody that does go back and listen to the Mabel series, you will find that she seemed to know everybody of the day. Just through either a direct connection or she had letters with them, which then connected to all these different people. And the fact that when she was in Florence and managed to just kind of cross paths of all the people that she could potentially meet and become friends with, it was this guy named Bindo Medici who actually happened to be connected to it. So again, we had one of our listeners email us a while back and say they want to turn Mabel into a drinking game, and that anytime that we bring her up, you got to take a shot or something.
Yep.
I understand that sentiment in that she does seem
just like the Kevin Bacon of history.
Honestly, she really is one of these crazy ones. We bring her up in the Ian Fleming series. She somehow was connected to all these different people. So anyhow, just a fun little factoid. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the last episode of Leonardo da Vinci, we covered da Vinci's time in Florence after leaving the employ of Cesare Borgia. Da Vinci was commissioned by the Signoria of Florence to paint the Battle of Anghiari, a painting that was slated to be over 50 feet long. Having just experienced the horrors of combat working for the Pope's son, Da Vinci writes pages upon pages dedicated to painting war accurately, drafting a painting that was so incredible, I personally believe that it would have surpassed any work he's ever made before. During this time, Da Vinci met another Renaissance legend, Michelangelo, whose sour mood would spur a rivalry between the two that would continue on until Leonardo decides to abandon his project. Having just lost his father and after finishing up a legal battle with his brothers over his uncle's estate, Da Vinci looks back at his first time moving to Milan and decides to go back again. Now, with the support of the King of France and the French governor Charles d'Amboise, Leonardo continues his journey discovering the human body with his dissection of a 100-year-old man and uses his love for hydrodynamics to learn the secrets of the human heart. Speaking of the heart, Leonardo becomes friends with the Melzi family and after meeting the bright-eyed Francesco, decides to impart his legacy to him, adopting him as his son and ward. We return to Da Vinci, now in Milan with the favor of France, researching another topic that's danced through his mind for his entire life, the nature of Earth and how it sustains itself.
Now, I will also add really quickly before we get going any further, for anybody that is curious to see, loads and loads and loads of pictures relating to all the stuff that we're talking about, go and check out our website, thebiographerspodcast.com. Akiva has found all these amazing kind of companion images for every single one of the episodes, so we have that kind of categorized, and it's not just Leonardo's kind of sketches or his paintings, it's pictures and paintings of the Medicis, of different engineering feats, of other works that were by Michelangelo from the last episode. So all these different things to kind of give you visual context for what we're talking about. Go check out our website, thebiographerspodcast.com.
Yeah. I already had a couple friends laugh about our little bit about Michelangelo's sort of competition painting right next to the Battle of Anghiari. And we were just talking about how it's like a bunch of buff naked men.
Yep.
It's on a website if you want to see it. And you'll totally understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, you can see some Renaissance booties.
Okay, so it was easy for Da Vinci to compare the veins of human arms with rivers and streams, and the heart with the seed from which stems and roots grow. So naturally, Da Vinci explored the Earth, believing the reverse is true. As we learned in his study of the Vitruvian Man years ago, Leonardo saw the human body as a microcosm for the world at large, and used this way of thinking as a yardstick to measure both humans and the world around him. Now 56 years old, Leonardo would continue his humanist research, focusing on the world in his 1508 drawings, now called the Codex Leicester, which Bill Gates purchased for $30.8 million just a couple of years ago.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Man,
Which, by the way,
you know you have money.
I was like, honestly, kind of feels wrong. I don't feel like any private entity should own Leonardo's work, but this one of the most important codexes in history is owned by Bill Gates, which I just feel like, just going to say that's kind of wrong. I feel like
there's
wrong.
A lot of stuff like that. It was like recently, did you hear about how the Stegosaurus, one of the most complete Stegosaurus skeletons, fossils, was purchased privately for like $34 million or something like that? And it was one of those, initially I was mad, and then I found out that the person, whoever it was that bought it, immediately gave it to a museum.
Oh, okay.
To put on display.
Okay.
And I was like, there we go. You don't need a Stegosaurus skeleton in your home. I feel like it belongs to the world.
Oh, you're looking for the bathroom? Turn left at the Stegosaurus.
That is seriously...
Okay.
That's some Citizen Kane level.
I know, right? So, Codex Leicester would be the most in-depth dive into how the world worked, being 72 pages long, crammed with thousands of discoveries around geology, hydrodynamics, and astronomy, accompanied with 360 drawings to illustrate his ideas. This wouldn't be the first time that humans would explain the workings of the world as if it was a living organism, but Leonardo was one of the first to try to describe Earth's functions using empirical data as opposed to religious or spiritual teachings. In one page, Da Vinci writes, quote, "Its flesh is the soil. Its bones are the arrangements of rocks that compose its mountains. Its pulse is the regular flow and ebb of the sea. The body of the earth, like the body of animals, is interwoven with ramifications of veins, which are all joined together and formed for the nutrition and revivification of this earth and its creatures." So basically, as we've heard in lots of philosophy, the earth is an organism, but this time he's he's using humans as sort of a model for that and not saying like the earth has an actual heart, the earth has blood. It's more of like in the same way that veins course through human bodies, rivers course through the earth, right?
And amazingly, it feels like he's not that wrong. I've heard the ocean described as the lungs of the planet.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same. It's the pulse of the planet. It feels very similar.
Yeah. So what I find so interesting about Leonardo's research is how he was able to come up with such objective conclusions using a philosophy that scientists today would see as artistic interpretation. Based on what I've read from Da Vinci, this use of humanist philosophy serves more as a guide for questions and a concrete way to answer problems, which is kind of what we were talking about. For instance, when Leonardo wanted to find out why mountain streams exist, he used his macrocosm-microcosm thinking to come up with possible theories. His first thought was that the ocean went under the land, using water pressure to heat up and fill rocky vascular systems below the mountain's surface. But after he ran into issues with his analogies, he ditched his ideals in favor for something more concrete. He was able to recognize that after water evaporates, rain and snow accumulates and runs down the mountainside and even soaks into the rock and soil to form subterranean rivers. Da Vinci used philosophical ideals to guide him, but rarely let them limit his ability to see objectively, which would put him at odds with the society around him when he studied geology. If you remember from our analysis on the Virgin of the Rocks, Leonardo also had a keen eye for geology, and it was during his late 50s in Milan that he would discover properties of the Earth that wouldn't be considered widespread until the Enlightenment period. Studying rocks, Leonardo learned that the oceans were much greater in the distant past, seeing that there were marine fossils on mountaintops. There was only one problem with his ideas. Catholic theologians had already made conclusions about this stuff that went against Leonardo's theory.
So, religion versus science.
Yes. There's been, and we might get into this in a bonus episode in the future, but there's been a lot of debate about like, oh, the Catholic Church hated Leonardo, stuff like that. And I think if they knew more about Leonardo, they probably would. But it wasn't like the Catholic Church was hunting him down. He just was very like, no, that's wrong.
I would imagine that he had kind of the notion in his brain that he didn't really want to share it with the Catholic Church because he knew better.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he almost got imprisoned when he was in his 20s, you know?
And it was one of those lessons learned, it feels like, because he knew what would happen if the church found out about it, because they were not joking when it came to how they believed the world turned and that it was the center of the universe and all this stuff, where it was like,
this wasn't like, this is our thought. They were like, this is the thought.
Yeah, wasn't Galileo imprisoned because he said, no, I found that the sun is actually at the center of our galaxy, and the church went, yeah, no, you're going to jail.
Yeah, so Catholics at the time explained that the reason someone could find fish bones fossilized into mountainsides was that they died during the time of Noah and the flood. But Da Vinci wasn't having it. In one of his notes, he writes, quote, "Of the foolishness and simple-mindedness of those who required that these animals should be carried by the deluge to these places far from sea. If the deluge had carried the shells 300 miles from the sea, it would have carried them with different species, amassed together. But we see that at such distances, the oysters, shells, and squids stay congregated together."
Oh, crazy. That's cool.
Yeah. Unlike others of his time, Da Vinci was fine with tossing out dogma if it didn't make any scientific sense. Leonardo would also argue that the flood didn't explain another anomaly, that fossils can be found in different layers of strata on rock walls. I truly don't understand when he had time to do this, but while Leonardo was studying hydrodynamics and dissecting humans, he also made time for himself to discover the idea of an archaeological record.
Wow.
Yeah, so comparing the layers of rock on a cliffside with the rings of a tree, and he realized each layer of sediment held relics of a different time in Earth's history.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's like him looking at water and going, oh, it's like air.
Yes.
It's like the same. He has this amazing gift for comparison like that. I feel.
Yeah, but he doesn't let the comparison like bog him down like a lot of sort of philosophers of the time. He's not like, it has to be like air. He's like, it might be like air, which is a very different.
Yeah.
Just that slight change in perspective allowed him to do something like figure out an archaeological record, right? So this would also make Leonardo da Vinci the father of paleontology.
Jeez.
So he studied fossils about 300 years. He studied fossils objectively. I know there were other people who knew about fossils at the time, but objectively, 300 years before paleontology became a real thing, he was already kind of figuring this stuff out.
One more thing to add to the list about Da Vinci, I feel like.
Well, what I love is, like, it's not like he ever figures out anything, past the Enlightenment period, but every single Enlightenment philosopher or scientist, he's just completely just taken a dump on. Like, everybody who figured out anything in the 1700s, you didn't. Da Vinci figured it out first.
That's really funny.
Like, maybe you figure out the telephone, good on you. Da Vinci didn't figure that one out, but like anyone who figured anything, like Newton, Bernoulli, any paleontologist, any doctor.
I'm waiting for you to be like, and one day he went out with a kite and it had a key tied to it, and then figured out electricity.
Yeah. I wonder, I don't think he knows a whole lot about electricity yet, but... Yeah. Oh, and as an aside, Da Vinci spends a few days working on the nature of the skies, and in a notebook page next to a drawing of male genitalia writes the quote, "The sun does not move," and refuses to elaborate further.
What?
He realizes that the sun doesn't move.
So he's basically figuring out what Galileo is figuring out?
There's no... And here's the thing. Okay, so we'll get into it. Astronomy didn't seem to be Da Vinci's biggest interest. Referring to the nature of the world around him seemed to be a little bit more important, but he does take a stab at figuring out the cosmos in Codex Leicester, writing discoveries like, quote, "The Earth is not the center of sun's orbit, nor at the center of the universe, but in the center of its companion elements and united with them." It was also during this time that he would realize that the moon doesn't have any intrinsic glow either, but instead reflects the sun, which is out of view.
My mouth is open right now.
I know. He does get some stuff wrong, right? So he says the same thing for the stars, which isn't true, but honestly, not a bad guess considering the fact that Jupiter reflects at us like a star and is brighter than any of the other stars around it.
But he did figure out that the sun...
That we were heliocentric.
We're basically all going around the sun, and not even just that he's like, hey, we're all actually moving around the sun, and these other things are too, but not everything is. So we're actually in this one thing of moving around the sun, but even that is its own thing apart from all these other things out there in the sky.
Yeah.
That's insane.
He was able to distinguish like the motion of the moon being, centered around the Earth, but the motion of the sun was static. The sun doesn't move.
This kind of brilliance really does freak me out, if that makes sense, where it's like, how can you be so good at so many things and have this ability to just never stop your brain from going, connect, figure out. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really wild. In fact, with the whole "the sun does not move" quote, for a while, a lot of historians were like, no, he didn't figure that. He couldn't have figured that out. There's nothing in his notes to figure that out. This must have been for a prop for a play, but he wasn't working on any plays at the time. This was before he would work for the next person that he did pageants for, so he didn't have any like amusements or anything that he was really working on for the most part. So yeah, he probably just looked at the sun and was like, that doesn't move.
And the fact that it was other scientists devoted their life to figuring that out, and for him it was a footnote.
Yeah, he's like, oh,
it's amazing. It's like a casual note, just like, oh yeah, turns out.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah.
Next.
He was like, that's weird. E = MC squared, huh? Da Vinci also figured out why the sky was blue, a question that puzzled thinkers from Aristotle to Einstein partially, concluding that it was water that gave the sky its tint, writing, quote, "I say that the azure in which the air shows itself is not its own color, but it's caused by warm humidity, evaporated in very minute and insensible atoms, which catches behind itself the percussion of solar rays and makes itself luminous under the vast shades."
So that's not 100% true, though, right? It's not the ocean reflecting that makes the sky blue.
Well, that's not what he's saying. He's saying it's humidity in the air that turns the sky blue, and that is true.
Okay.
Like to a T.
Okay.
I thought that it was the ocean reflecting when I was a kid.
I thought it was the light rays.
Yeah,
I thought that's what it was. Is that it was basically on the light spectrum. Blue is a more high intensity color. Red is a lower intensity. So at sunset, we're seeing the lower intensity.
For sure. But that's because it's going through more atmosphere. So from behind in this water vapor sort of situation, that is what, to some extent, obviously there's, he doesn't figure out all about water in the light spectrum. For instance, he doesn't understand how rainbows work. Newton gets to figure that one out.
Okay.
But yeah, it is true that humidity and water vapor that's stratified in air is what gives, the sky its blue tint.
Crazy.
So The way he managed to figure that one out had more to do with his experience as a painter, noting a change in color as he climbed a mountainside when he was looking at the sky, writing, quote, "If you go to the top of a high mountain, the sky will look proportionately darker above you as the atmosphere becomes rarer between you and the outer darkness. The outer darkness being outer space."
Interesting.
Right. Around the same time that Da Vinci would wrap up Codex Leicester, his short but sweet reunion with the city of Milan would come to an end. In the political scene, as we're jumping out of the Codex, the Sforzas had been able to muster enough power to retake their home city for a bit under a sort of tug-of-war battle between France and the Sforzas. So it was time for Da Vinci to hightail it out of there before things got dicey again. This time, heading to the home estate of his adopted son some 20 miles away. This would be the closest to a true family that Leonardo would have since his days as a boy, reading with Grandpa Antonio or spending time with Catalina or Catabriga. Now, in his 60s, Da Vinci would quietly continue his explorations with his partner Salai and a now 21-year-old Francesco Melzi accompanying him. It's around this time that we get our first true portrait of Da Vinci as an older man. This time, not painted by himself, but his adopted son. Whenever Leonardo drew himself at this time, he often exaggerated his age, giving himself an overly wrinkled face and patrician nose, like in the Turin portrait that we have on our website, which tends to be his most famous self-portrait. In the eyes of his son, however, we see that Leonardo still retained the beauty he was famous for in his younger years, now with long hair and the beard of a sage master.
So I've got the side-by-sides pulled up here, and I totally know what you mean. It's funny, the one that, the self-portrait that Leonardo does of himself, that's a very famous picture. I think most people that are familiar with Da Vinci know
on some of my
what that looks
textbooks
like.
too, yeah.
But you're absolutely right. The one that's done by his adopted son, Melzi, it's way kinder. It's oddly
Like that's what a
even
60-year-old man
flattering.
looks like. But if you look at the Turin portrait, painted or drawn at the exact same time, he almost, I think sometimes to some extent he was kind of wearing his inside on the outside a little bit when he was drawing himself.
Yeah.
Like I know whenever I see like Shalina draw herself and she's in a particular mood, the way that she looks as she draws herself is different. And I think that's really true for a lot of artists.
Sure.
You know, it's kind of cliche to say, but artists just draw different versions of themselves in a way.
I think we talked about this in a previous episode. You look at yourself in the mirror, you see a certain thing. Most people don't see that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's honestly kind of sweet because that gives us an impression of what his son thought of his teacher / parent, of like way more youthful, right?
And really quickly, I'm curious, Da Vinci's longtime, I don't want to say lover because that's not even fair. Partner. Yeah, it's a more accurate way to say it. Is he still in the picture? Is he kind of pseudo-adopted parent to Melzi as well?
Well, if you remember, they're a little bit closer to each other's age than you than what's comfortable.
Okay.
I mean, there's still like a 10, 15-year age gap, but certainly not old enough to be Melzi's dad.
Okay, fair enough.
And also, I think the dynamics like of a gay relationship at this time, I don't think would really include parentage from the other spouse quite as much.
Gotcha.
And even then, even if that was the case, Salai was just had such an attitude and was such a sort of like facetious person. I don't think that parenting would have been their style.
Fair enough.
It's only now in the setting years of Da Vinci's life that he's beginning to fit the stereotype of the old wizard that many still see Leonardo as. Part of the idea that we have for Leonardo's looks comes from another of his followers at the time, a young painter named Raphael. We've talked about him before. Around 1512, Raphael would complete a fresco in the Vatican called the School of Athens, showing the philosophers of Rome's cultural past debating, with Plato and Aristotle walking together. Raphael seems to have used his teacher as a subject for his painting, with the dead giveaway being that Plato sported a toga that was dyed the silky rose color which Da Vinci was so fond of.
It's amazing seeing this because I remember studying this exact painting in art history class, and I totally forgot that it was Raphael.
Yeah, it's Raphael, cool. And then in the rose tunic is Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, he's playing Plato in this situation, but
he's the model for Plato.
He's the model,
basically.
Yeah. It's really like we talked about before, and like all Renaissance paintings of every single scene, people are generally using a face that they know, right?
It's funny.
So Leonardo would spend the next few years of his life hopping from commission to commission, looking for a patron to take him in. His luck would turn around in 1513 when Giovanni the Medici, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, would be appointed as Pope Leo X, bringing prosperity to Florence again and serving as the last pope in history that wasn't a priest first, which I think is kind of a good thing. Like his father Lorenzo, Giovanni was a lover of the finer things in life and would use his position to indulge in theater, music, and art, being famous for proclaiming, quote, "Let us enjoy the papacy since God has given it to us." Which is basically being like, I'm famous, let's spend money.
Well, it's also, you could say the exact same thing for anything. So let us enjoy our crimes because God gave them to us.
Yes.
It's like, wait.
Let us enjoy being billionaires.
Right.
Shout out to Jesus for making me the owner of Amazon.
Oh, you sound like one of the mega church leaders. Be like, hey, look, God has blessed me with a private jet. Don't get mad at me, get mad at God.
Which was honestly not bad for Da Vinci. So, with money to burn, Pope Leo would offer Da Vinci patronage for a short period, employing him first and foremost as an engineer and designer. Da Vinci was quite happy with the offer and would pack up his things to move to Rome for a while with his little family in tow. He would spend his days living in Villa Belvedere, a gorgeous palace with botanical gardens, orchards, classic Roman sculptures, a menagerie, and most importantly, his good friend from Milan, Donato Bramante. If you remember that guy who painted sort of a selfie of the two of each other, he worked...
I think I do. Is it the kind of... They
were architects together. They worked on Tower for a little while.
Yeah.
The two of them were really good friends, and they were both court entertainers and would riff off of each other's, freestyle music in the court, that type of thing.
Was it another one of the kind of paintings of Plato and Socrates or something like that?
Yeah,
but it was actually them two?
Heraclitus and Democritus.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
The two would once again be happily reunited, sharing ideas for architecture and design, while Da Vinci showed off his newest interests. Also, the two of them would do some music together at this point, too. At this point, Leonardo seemed to have a renewed interest in something from his teen years. Thinking back on a project where he and Verrocchio would use the power of the sun to braise a giant copper ball for the Duomo, Leonardo would have pages and pages dedicated to using mirrors and lenses to concentrate light. In some, he hoped to find a better way to look at the moon, but most seemed to be built for the purpose of concentrating light to a singular point to produce extreme heat, which he hoped to use for a variety of applications, writing, quote, "With this, one can supply heat for any boiler in a dyeing factory, and with this, a pool can be warmed up." However, things took a weird and abrupt turn during his mirror studies when he was appointed a German assistant whose name was lost to time. It would seem that the assistant appointed to him was working with another mirror maker, sharing all of Leonardo's research against his will. As a result, Da Vinci would write multiple drafts to his new patron complaining about his assistant, each more vicious than the other, calling him a traitor and a cheater and a thief. All these
A German? No. Sorry, I actually really love the German people now, but I can't not make a crack about them.
Yeah, America. As much as I wish there was more information on this sort of unusual spiral for Da Vinci, I couldn't find anything more since in the summer of 1515, Da Vinci would find a way to escape the invention thief when he was asked to escort the Pope on a secret trip to Bologna that might lead him to his next and most favorite patron. During his time in Bologna, Pope Leo would hold a secret council with the new upstart king of France, Francis I, which, if you're going to be the king of France, I feel like Francis is kind of redundant. It's
kind of rad, though.
I'm the king of France, Francis.
It's like, I'm the president of America, Americonius.
At only 21, Francis took the title from his father, Louis XII, and lived up to his reputation by taking back the city of Milan. Once again, Da Vinci's kind reputation would do him some favors. It would seem that the son of the man who tried to ship the Last Supper back to France would have an even greater love for Leonardo than his father, having his court write endless letters to the Pope asking for Da Vinci, writing, quote, "I beg you to urge Master Leonardo so that he should come to the king's presence." In the summer of 1516, Leonardo would take his first and last journey out of Italy through the Alps to be with his new patron, King Francis I, in the city of Amboise, which for the French people, if I didn't pronounce it right, go fuck yourself.
It might be Amboise.
No, it has an S. I looked it up.
I know, but a lot of times the S in French is silent. So
yeah,
I don't know.
I said
no
Amboise, but then I looked up a video and they said it's Amboise.
Oh, I will default to you. I'm not going to pretend to be some French authority.
I'm not a French authority either, and honestly, I don't care what they think.
Like a true American.
While Leonardo certainly made time for his personal pursuits, his patronage from other men of power had turned sour for most of his life. With Lorenzo the Magnificent, he was sent off to play minstrel the second he came of age. With Ludovico Sforza, Da Vinci wasn't given a salary for the first 5 years he spent in court and was pestered constantly to be on time. Back in Florence, the Signorio would purposefully make his work environment harder by pitting an angry young artist against him, and Cesare Borgia literally strangled one of his friends to death. Now, however, during the last years of his life, he had found that the new king of France would be the greatest patron he would ever have, taking care of him until the very end.
Cool.
Francis was everything Leonardo liked in a man, professionally speaking, maybe personally. Physically, he was a giant of his time, being 6 feet tall with the muscles to go with it.
Dang.
He was an accomplished fencer and wrestler, and his skill in battle was incredible, being famous for leading the charge with his men. After Borgia, that dominating type might have been soured for Leonardo, but there was a difference with Francis. He was honorable. In fact, when Francis took Milan for the French, instead of executing the Sforza house, he appointed them seats in his court, sparing their lives. As for his personal life, Francis was also charming by all accounts. Being a total ladies' man, the young king was famous for his skill as a dancer. France had not seen the Renaissance overtake them the way it had in Italy yet, and Francis hoped to change that. He had an intrinsic love of knowledge from any and all sources, learning to speak Italian, Latin, Spanish, and Hebrew along with his native tongue. This desire to learn made Leonardo, now 64, one of his favorite people. Francis would set up Da Vinci in the cozy but dignified Chateau Leclos, which he had a 500-foot tunnel connecting his palace to, so he could spend any spare minute he had learning from Leonardo. Unlike the people of Florence, King Francis would admire Da Vinci unconditionally, allowing Leonardo to go down rabbit holes of information, ranting about anything from architecture to astronomy, never pestering him to finish a painting or a design. Francis got his greatest enjoyment from just being around Leonardo, not from getting results from him. The king would write about Leonardo, quote, "I could never believe there was another man." Should I do the French accent?
Sure.
Okay. The king would write about Leonardo, quote, "I could never believe there was another man born in this world who knew as much as Leonardo. And not only of sculpture, painting, and architecture. He was truly a great philosopher." Philosophy being interchangeable for scientist at the time. You like that French?
Great accent.
Thank you.
You're killing it.
I know.
You're going to make all the French very mad, and I like it.
Financially speaking, Leonardo wasn't making money out of his ears, but he had walked into a situation that couldn't have been better for him. Along with his use of the beautiful chateau, Da Vinci received a healthy, monthly stipend that wasn't dependent on his ability to produce any paintings. That didn't mean, however, that Da Vinci would sit around and make nothing. Da Vinci took it upon himself to become a court entertainer once more, this time making elaborate sets and parade decorations. My favorite design comes from a pageant held in 1518, celebrating the baptism of the king's son. Leonardo would transform the main plaza in Amboise into a Disney-style castle, complete with cannons. A diplomat attending would write that the cannons were, quote, "firing air-inflated balls with great blasting and smoking effects. These balls, falling on the piazza, bounced all over to everyone's delight without any damage." I can only imagine Da Vinci atop his fake fortress, laughing and smiling as he shoots bouncy balls at the crowd below. He would have loved going to raves.
I was giggling at myself, imagining balls bouncing on the piazza.
Okay. We're mature.
The balls were delightfully bouncing on the piazza. Sorry.
During his stay in France.
So stupid.
During his stay in France, we get a detailed letter by Antonio de Betis, who writes about having dinner at the old painter's house in his diary. In it, we hear a cozy story of Leonardo dressed in his fine rose silk, showing off his paintings next to a fireplace, letting them look through his endless writings on anatomy and telling them the tales of his work in the past. Unfortunately, getting old isn't a walk in the park for Da Vinci. In his diary, Antonio writes, quote, "Because of the paralysis in his right hand, one can no longer expect any masterpieces from him. He has trained a Milanese disciple who works very well, for if Master Leonardo is no longer capable of painting with the gentleness of touch which was his, he nevertheless continues to teach." Paralysis. This is the first time we ever hear about this, but apparently he had a stroke around this time. As debilitating as I'm sure it was for him, it would seem that God would have a sense of humor, considering his left hand, which he was ridiculed for writing with, was spared.
Oh,
So he
wow.
actually was still able to write. People were like, oh no, his right hand is paralyzed. He'll never be able to make anything again. He was left-handed. So, I mean, it wasn't great, but while he was never one to lament over his personal issues, it would seem that this loss of function would have him expressing his feelings through art in a way that seems very Leonardo. Da Vinci would once again draw the nature of water, this time in chaotic swirls known as the deluge drawings. Martin Clayton, a Windsor curator, would write that these were, quote, an outpouring of something really personal, a kind of crescendo at a time when his concerns are more strongly expressed.
It reminds me, I'm looking at the drawings right now. I can't remember what it's actually called, but you'll know what I'm saying. There's a very famous Japanese drawing of the waves that are crashing.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that. And for anybody else that knows what I'm talking about, you can call us out and send us an email about it. But that's exactly what it reminds me of. You can see the froth of the wave crashing. You can see the swirls of the water moving like a wave. It's very cool.
Yeah. And it like I said, Leonardo's not a very emotional guy. He doesn't talk about his feelings. He's much more focused on the real world. But at a point where he's old, he's kind of tired. He just experienced a stroke. I feel like there had to have been some emotion in these drawings of these floods with these like crazy chaotic swirls, very melancholy in a way.
Feels like a lot of turmoil.
Yeah, quite in a very real sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Actual literal turmoil. Around a year later, in May of 1519, let's try that again. On an unknown day in 1518, Da Vinci would spend his afternoons studying the area of different sized triangles when he followed his note-taking with an etc. to be continued. The reason he gives is, quote, the soup is getting cold. This would be the last known page of notes written by Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh.
Around a year later, in May 1519, Leonardo would be lying in his bed, doctors surrounding him, when his short-lived favorite patron, the King of France, came to his bedroom. Leonardo mustered the strength to sit up and, like he always did, began to teach the king what he knew. The subject for today wasn't lighting or perspective, but instead, Leonardo would point to himself and give a description of his illness, pointing out vascular pain and diagnosing himself with a failing heart and strained blood vessels. As he explained away, his symptoms would worsen and he would begin to fall back, but the king would gently hold his master's head and slowly bring it back down as Leonardo da Vinci took his final breath.
No, Leo.
When I read that, I won't lie, I teared up.
As you should. I've said this from the very beginning. If you don't feel that by the end of your research, or you as a listener, hopefully that's what we do for you, is illuminate this person to feel like you know them well enough that when they finally pass, you're like, my friend. No, I want you to be
really
around.
how I felt with this.
Yeah.
The movement was so moving that painters all over the world would make dozens of versions of this scene, with the most beautiful coming from Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. You've probably seen it before in a history textbook. It's King Francis sort of gently holding Leonardo's head in the bed frame, which they actually still have at the chateau that Da Vinci lived in.
Oh, wow.
It's very, very moving. The only other writing we have of that time is his last will and testament for Leonardo. He wished to be buried at the Church of Amboise, asking for, quote, 60 candles to be carried by 60 poor men, to whom shall be given money for carrying them. He gave his serving woman a fur-lined cloak and 2 gold ducats, and gave all of his servants money, making sure not to leave anyone out. As for his half-brothers, he gave them back the rights to his uncle's manor, even after their terrible treatment of him. For his son, Francesco Melzi, he was given, quote, all the instruments and portraits pertaining to his art and calling as a painter. Salai, Leonardo's biggest nuisance and longtime lover, was only given half of the equity of the vineyard in Milan, which he had to share with Melzi. But, true to his name, the little devil carved out more of the pie for himself when Da Vinci passed. 5 years later, Salai would be accused of theft and challenged to a duel where he would be shot with a crossbow. After examining his estate, it would seem that Salai managed to get his hands on multiple copies of Leonardo's work, possibly including Da Vinci's most famous painting of all time, the Mona Lisa.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I've been, this whole freaking series, I've been waiting for you to bring up the Mona Lisa, and it's not until after he's dead.
I know. To be honest, and this is kind of why, to be honest, the Mona Lisa was the only painting I had zero interest in discussing. In my mind, it was a varnish tinted old portrait that American tourists clamor over at the Louvre, and its social status had, in my mind, made it basic. However, when Leonardo was painting it, the Mona Lisa was his least memorable work. One that, over the course of 18 years, Da Vinci would put nearly every aspect of his heart and personality into. So, for the old man's sake, let's dive into his work one last time. After looking at a restored, crisp version of the Mona Lisa, it's clear that this portrait meant more to the maker than it did to the customer, but every good masterpiece has its beginnings. As for this one, the painting was commissioned all the way back in 1503 by Francesco del Giocondo, a silk trader who had just recently married a woman named Lisa only a few years back. From all sources, the newlyweds were truly in love, something that couldn't be said for nearly any painting Da Vinci had to take on so far. Francesco was a client of Leonardo's father, and it was during this time that Da Vinci had left his job with Cesare Borgia and was looking for work as his finances began to deplete. However, his lack of funds doesn't explain why he took on the work, since at the time, Isabella d'Este would send her minions to hound him for a portrait, which they obviously could pay more for. The truth was, this had to be one of the only paintings made at this time that he actually wanted to do, much like his very first non-religious portrait of Ginevra de' Benci. Besides the fact that Lisa was beautiful, Da Vinci took on the job because she was no one special. He wasn't painting the mistress of a duke or someone from the royal family, so there were no expectations on how it should come out besides his own. I think it's fair to say that everyone listening has seen the Mona Lisa before, but for those of you who are listening in the car, I'll help you conjure up the image while we tell her story. Our subject is a 24-year-old woman named Lisa del Giocondo, and she sits outside on a balcony overlooking a breathtaking landscape in three-quarters pose, with her hands gently holding the armrest of a chair she's sitting on. Her brown hair is left untied, with perfect curls streaming down her face in a way very reminiscent of Leonardo's depictions of flowing water. She wears a blue-gray dress with shiny burnt orange sleeves, with a gossamer shawl covering her head and twisting around her shoulders. Da Vinci proves his mastery of painting fabric in this since it was originally commissioned by a silk trader. The landscape is Leonardo at its finest, part reality, part fantasy. It would seem that Lisa's house was 10,000 feet in the air, since the valley below features rock formations that stretch out for miles. In the nearest part of the painting, we see a landscape of dry red, orange sandstone. But as the mountain range continues, rivers flow through it like veins, making the land in the far distance rich with life. The sky is a perfect misty blue, darkening as we gain in elevation, giving us a peek into the outer darkness that Leonardo believes would be revealed if we climbed high enough. A distant mist obscures objects in the far background in the classic sfumato style that Leonardo developed when he was still an apprentice. It seems fitting that the Mona Lisa would be the painting to accompany him to the end. Perhaps it wasn't the religious icon that the Last Supper was, or a testament to Da Vinci's mastery of posing, like the Battle of Agniati, but in a way, it became representative of almost everything that Leonardo loved. Anatomy, light, perspective, geology, hydrodynamics, the sky, and the crazy idea that we could one day understand the world we live and breathe in.
There's a couple things that stand out to me. Namely, on the bottom left-hand corner, there's 666.
That's just because it's a copy.
Oh, okay. That's not as exciting.
No.
Go on, though. I want to hear what more you have to say.
As I was wrapping up this episode, there's something in my mind that I feel is the most important takeaway from the life of Leonardo da Vinci, which is don't be in awe of Leonardo. Be inspired. If there was any superpower attributed to Leonardo, it wouldn't be his keen sense of perception, his skill as an architect, inventor, or even a painter. It would be his ability to ask himself a question. And instead of going on with his life, he was able to pursue the answer to its end with no regard on whether it was practical or not. It's true that the famous people in life are often born with advantages that most of us will never get. Da Vinci was born a bastard of a cheating father with no ability to read Latin or write correctly, but Leonardo recognized that the difference between someone who made a difference and someone who died unsuccessful is fearlessness, not conventional advantages. Leonardo probably had twice as many failed projects than successful ones, but he's known as one of the greatest minds in human history, not as one of the greatest failures. His pursuit of knowledge and happiness was so pure that failure was almost inconsequential. In his 30s, he would learn that true art doesn't have to come from pain, and that making and nurturing friendships were the key to not only happiness, but also discovery. After working for one of the most vile men in history, he held on to his childlike wonder for the world and refused to give up on his big ideas. So no, Leonardo wasn't a superhuman genius or a magical sage gazing into the future. He was one of us, and we can be like him if we're willing to step into the cave.
I feel a deep sense of remorse right now, in that I feel like it's a friend of mine who's not around.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really do. You know, when I finished up this episode, when I finished up my reading, I should say, I went over to Shalana and I was really, really sad. And she's like, "What happened?" I was like, "Well, he died." And, she's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I feel like you saw yourself in Da Vinci." And I do, but I think more importantly, if I think about myself in a way, it's sort of the other way around. When I was 8 years old, my first book that I had ever really read page to page was on Leonardo da Vinci. And I thought I wanted to be like him. I even wrote, I remember I would write my notes with, in cursive with like figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, sort of drawing each object, separately. If you remember in the first episode, I mentioned that I wanted to be an inventor when I was a kid.
Yeah.
If anything, I tried to be Da Vinci. It wasn't I became who I was, and then as I got older, I realized I'm just like Da Vinci. I tried to be him. And in some ways, yeah, when I finally get to hear the end of his life and I really get to understand the full breadth of his life now as an adult, understanding the complexities of, the social situations that he was in, his depression, coming out, all of these other things, I feel like I really got to know this person. And I feel like him and I are in some ways kindred spirits. And I'm sure there's a lot of you listening out there who have experienced the same things that Da Vinci has gone through. There's every single one of you has this childlike wonder within yourselves. You have this little dream that you think is stupid, but it's still worth pursuing. And you think that it's stupid that you think that. Da Vinci, the only difference between him and us was that he was smart enough to realize that those stupid ideas were the most important ones. And I don't know. I just get emotional
also,
about it.
And not just that, I feel like there was this element to him where, who knows? Maybe he had some idea in his brain as he was going through his life that he was like, no, I'm gonna be one of the important ones. But I'd be willing to bet that he didn't feel that way. That he was his whole life kind of going through all the things that he was going through, thinking through all these different amazing scientific ideas that nobody had tapped into before, and was probably just thinking, yeah, isn't this what you do? Don't you just think about stuff and write it down? I do. That's just what I'm doing. It's
the power of having that childlike imagination, and also the power of being present and not shutting yourself down before you see its end. I mean, we've gone through 7 episodes, 7 hours. Everybody has listened to 7 hours of Da Vinci's failings.
Yeah.
More failings than successes.
More incompletions than completions,
And I think the difference between him and somebody else who lives a very regular life is that person has more successes, but they also have less attempts. And specifically, whatever they do attempt that they succeed in was probably very low risk.
I think my biggest takeaway from Da Vinci, I totally agree with you. And there were a lot of takeaways that I had, a lot of amazing facts and sort of revelations and things. But I think the most amazing thing for me is that he represented this idea that it wasn't necessarily about what you actually do. It's about the pursuit of the thing that you want to do.
Yep.
The ceaseless pursuit of it, constantly saying, well, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. I'm going to go after this. I'm going to go after that. And it's amazing how far just that hunger was able to take him.
Yeah. And it's not in a grindset mindset, sort of, alpha male perspective.
No.
It's literally just almost entirely self-serving in a way, where he was just like, whatever I find interesting right now is who I'm going to be until I no longer find it interesting. I'll cater to the needs, if I need to pay for the bills for my, my boyfriend and for my house, whenever, I will still paint. But I'm going to learn how to fly. I'm going to, figure out the ways of the water and human anatomy. No one's asking me to do this. Someone's asked me to sculpt a horse. You didn't ask me to write an entire codex on it. I'm doing that for me. And it's in a way being devoted to doing something as opposed to being just painfully determined.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
He feels like he was a bottomless well of what if?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think when he added the buckets to the water wheels, he was staring at a water wheel for a mill, basically, and he went, what if and filled in some blanks.
Yep.
And then basically repeated that process his entire life, it feels like.
And success and failure were, obviously I'm sure he got upset, but mostly just inconsequential. It didn't matter if people bought his plans to build a new perfect city for Milan or something like that.
Right.
It didn't matter. He was just going to do it because what if? Because I have this curiosity.
So a couple questions for you then, now that we're officially finished up with Leonardo, everybody, but a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
One, is he still buried in, is it Amboise?
Amboise? Okay, so the tomb got moved at some point, and the bodies were moved, but it's not exactly sure where his remains ended up.
That sucks.
My guess is the Catholic Church probably has them somewhere secret for the exact purpose of, at the time, there was a lot of grave robbers and people selling trinkets and shit like that. That's my theory. Yeah.
So we don't technically really know where his remains are anymore.
No,
so
but we know it's somewhere in France. Most likely.
Okay, it is somewhere, we think anyway, somewhere in France, unless the Vatican has it in their basement somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other question that I have for you is in regards to the Mona Lisa. It felt like we kind of moved on from it pretty quickly. What was it? Was it literally just a painting that he started to do of this lady, and he just sort of like all of his life used it as this, or for at least for a long period of his life, used it as this continuous like work in progress, and he knew he was never going to get it back to his owner, so he just figured, I'll keep screwing with it to see where it goes? Is that...
Yeah. Daniel and I talked about this before recording. Like I said, I wasn't super stoked to get into the Mona Lisa, and besides sort of my personal, like, it's a Mona Lisa, it's not my favorite thing. We had touched on everything that makes the Mona Lisa what it is with every other painting. So there was nothing particularly special about the Mona Lisa other than the fact that it was his last work, and as a result of that, it was the culmination of everything he had learned in his life.
Gotcha.
But the Mona Lisa itself, he wasn't trying to make it his magnum opus. It was just something that he kept. It was a portrait that he, got commissioned. He never took the money from, by the way. So, the guy wasn't necessarily waiting for it. He never took the money from it, and he just kind of made it his own thing as time passed, and it was sort of his own personal pet project in a way. A fun little anecdote that I learned about the Mona Lisa, which is, if you look at it, she has no eyebrows, and that is not because Da Vinci didn't put eyebrows on. In the 1600s, Vasari actually writes that her eyebrows are completely perfect, and during a multispectral analysis of the painting, we find that there were eyebrows painted on the painting, but it was after the oil had already dried. So somebody cleaned it and wiped off.
Oh my gosh.
The Mona Lisa's eyebrows and eyelashes, even though apparently they were like perfect.
That's really, really funny.
So when you look at recreations from like contemporaries, like this Prado recreation that we'll have on the website, yes, she'll have eyebrows.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the Mona Lisa was just his sort of, in a way, kind of a love letter to art. It was, if you've ever been an artist and you've sold a lot of your paintings, there's just, I think, just sometimes a need where you're like, I want this one for me. And that was the Mona Lisa. It wasn't his best work. I think the Battle of Anghiari would have been his best work. But it was his, right? He wasn't planning on getting rid of it anytime soon. He had no plans to send it to, Lisa and the Giocondos. He just kind of kept it for himself until he passed. And it just happened to be with him when he died. And Salai happened to steal it. And it was happened to be gifted to the King of France. And it happened to become an icon, which we'll get into a little bit as to why it becomes an international icon, perhaps in a bonus episode for Patreon listeners. Or maybe we'll add it in for office hours. I wanted to add that story, but I thought after this sort of kind of beautiful letting go of Da Vinci as he passes, it would kind of have taken everything left field. But there is a very interesting heist that happens in the 1920s, I want to say, where somebody actually steals the Mona Lisa, and that's kind of how it becomes famous. Okay, so stake in the ground. You're saying all these conspiracy theories around the Mona Lisa, you're like, nah, not really. No, there's no. Da Vinci he's one of those people, and that's why I thought it was so important to finish with Da Vinci can be us, because I think the reason why there are so many conspiracy theories around Leonardo da Vinci is because he was just so unbelievably successful in his ability to figure out the world that there's no way that he didn't have secret knowledge or was secretly being pursued by the global elite sitting in their chambers with hoods on their faces. He was just a guy,
Okay.
and he was one of the smartest men that Earth has ever seen. But it was a direct result of just his mindset on how he came to learn things, and it wasn't some secret Da Vinci Code, numbers hidden in the pupils of his paintings, like History Channel type shit. It was just he was smart, and people can't sometimes comprehend people being incredibly smart, so they have to come up with fun and fantastical explanations.
That makes sense. Well, you heard it here, everybody. Sorry to disappoint you. It sounds like there's not a whole lot of conspiracy theory around the Mona Lisa to be validated. It was
just a beautiful
painting that he
painting
did, and it's
from an elder mind who is one of the greatest minds on the planet Earth, and it's so beautiful that it literally sparked these
imaginative things.
Yeah.
It's almost like we want to believe something because we can't believe that it's so simple.
Yeah.
Well, amazing, man. Fantastic work. I'm proud of you. And I hope everybody enjoyed the series so far. Or not so far. We're done with the series here. So I hope you all enjoyed the series. I know I did. I learned a ton of stuff most of this was stuff I didn't know about Leonardo da Vinci, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there were 4 or 5 things that I knew, and everything else I was like, nope, no idea. So I knew about like certain flying contraptions, and that was about it. So thanks everyone for listening. First and foremost, a couple of things to check off here before we wrap things up. First, I'll give you the little pitch for the next series that we're doing. At the end of every one of our series, we usually like to clue you in as to the person that we're doing next. So I'm going to be up next, and the person that I'm going to be focusing on is a person I would imagine most people out there
Ooh, I'm excited for the intro.
don't know. It's a man named Franz Liszt. Okay, now we'll get into why it's a lot more exciting with the launch of the next episode that's going to be all about Franz, but suffice it to say for now, Franz Liszt was the world's first rock star. And I'm using that term very literally. We'll get into the details as to why, but holy cow, the popularity of this man in his day cannot be understated. It was truly a phenomenon that I would only liken to somebody like Taylor Swift right now. It was
Michael
really
Jackson.
Yeah, that level of people went insane for this guy, and he was a classical piano player and composer. So that's who we're going to be getting into for our next series. I'm imagining that one's going to be maybe a 6 to 7 part series. We'll see as I'm about halfway through writing it right now. I'm planning on being done with probably about 4 or 5 episodes by the time we actually start recording, but we'll see as I start to get along here. So hopefully y'all are looking forward to that. I can promise you, not only is it a lot of fun, but for any music lover out there, I promise you, this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah. Daniel has been talking to me a little bit about Liszt as I have been finishing up Da Vinci. And I'm sure that there are some people who are like, okay, we just finished Da Vinci. Who's Franz Liszt? I'm telling you, this guy's insane.
It's going to be fun.
I'm at like almost as excited for Liszt as I was at Da Vinci, and Da Vinci was like my childhood favorite historical character of all time. So I'm very, very stoked to see what you have.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think y'all are going to enjoy it. He is one of those strangely forgotten characters of history. We'll talk about it more, but a big part of it was that he was alive in the days before recording music was a thing. All he could do is write it down. And I would liken it to saying, imagine if I came to you and said there was this amazing guitarist named Jimi Hendrix. Now, I know it sounds crazy because we don't have any recordings of him, but just trust me, he was really good.
It's almost like Leonardo being more famous as a musician in his early years than as a painter.
Yeah.
Luckily, he also painted, so we know about Da Vinci, but like we wouldn't have known that he was like, oh, no one would know about the set designer Leonardo da Vinci or the liar, improv musician Leonardo da Vinci. We know the painter Da Vinci and, by circumstance know that he did music. So the same thing goes with Liszt. Obviously, like there are famous composers and stuff like that, but as a piano player, it's a little bit different.
It is. And again, we're going to get into all the details as to why and what made it different. And again, it's like if you had never heard Jimi Hendrix play, but somebody was trying to replicate how he played through what he wrote down, you just couldn't capture the insanity that was Jimi Hendrix. It's just Franz Liszt was that person, but on a piano. Again, we'll get into it, and it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, last few things here before we close it all out. One more time, if anybody is able to support our show, it's just going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. You can also find us on all of our various social media networks. That is going to be Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. It's pretty much always going to be at The Biographers, except for Instagram, which is at the.biographers. I always like to give Akiva's website a shout out, Metalwork by Miola, for all of your knife working needs, chef knife needs. Go ahead and reach out to him there. That is Metalwork by Miola, MEOLA.com. And you can use the code biographers at checkout to receive 10% off of your order. And then lastly, any questions, comments, or corrections, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be doing another Office Hours episode, and we had just finished, the biography on one of the biggest characters in history. So I would really love to hear your guys' input, positive or negative.
Let us know.
I'll fight you if it's something bad. I'll commend you if it's something good. But I want to hear from you guys because, we just put 140 pages out there into the universe, and I just want to see what you guys' opinion is.
Absolutely. Let us know. Well, I think that's going to do it for us, everybody. Once again, great job, Akiva.
Thank you.
A little applause here. I'll give you a little clappy clap. We don't have an audience here, so I'm the audience of one.
We'll put some canned applause.
Canned yays in the background. Well, thanks, everybody, for listening. Like I always say at the end of our episodes here, remember, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge, and I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.